Hi guys! For my craft, I decided to try my hand at making royal icing sugar cookies. I chose these cookies because baking is something I've always loved to do, but never taken the time to actually learn any of the decorating techniques that professionals use. The royal icing technique is also something I've wanted to try for a while, but always been somewhat intimidated by. I also think baking as an activity in OT could be very motivating for patients that are dessert motivated like myself. And although the steps seem daunting at first, they can easily be broken down and modified depending on the participant. The main key to royal icing is egg white or meringue powder. There are some tutorials out there on making your own egg white powder, but I decided that was way outside the scope of this project. The main techniques involve having two consistencies of icing, a thicker piping icing and a thinner flood icing. These are all the objects needed for the cookies. Luckily, I was able to find my cute fruit and wine cookie cutters on Amazon. I was also able to find meringue powder, icing bags, and icing tips. For these cookies, I just used the Wilton No. 3 size tips, but having an even smaller one would have been nice for more intricate designs. There were a lot of small steps involved in making these cookies, but for time's sake, I broke it down into these 4 steps. Making the dough, rolling out the dough and using the cookie cutters to create shapes, making the icing, and then actually decorating the cookies. So to start out, I used the mixer to cream the butter and powdered sugar together. Then I added the egg, vanilla, and almond extract. While this was mixing, I mixed together all of my dry ingredients. Then when these were mixed, I slowly added these to the wet ingredients in the mixer. This step required a lot of bilateral coordination as well as visual motor integration to know the rate at which I should pour in the dry ingredients. It's important not to overmix the dough as it can make the cookies chewy. After this, I divided the dough in half and flattened each half between 2 sheets of parchment paper. I then put these in the refrigerator overnight. The next day, I rolled out the dough so that it was about 1/4 of an inch thick. It was harder than it might seem and required a lot of muscle strength and endurance in my shoulder flexion and extension. It also took a lot of depth perception to see if the dough was even. I then used the cookie cutters to make shapes out of the dough and transfer them to my greased cookie sheets. This took a lot of trial and error as the cookies would often break apart when transferring, especially if they had thinner sections. I then baked them for about 7 minutes. Unfortunately, a lot of my cookies broke apart after baking too. I waited until the next day to make sure the cookies were completely cooled off before making the icing. The icing was definitely the most difficult and time-consuming part. To start, I mixed the powdered sugar and meringue powder together in the mixer. I then slowly added in the water mixed in with the vanilla. I had to constantly monitor the amount of water I was adding so that I didn't make the icing too thin. This required a lot of sustained attention. The idea was for it to be a toothpaste-like consistency. After this, I divided the icing into 5 bowls and mixed my colors with the food coloring. It took a while for me to get the correct ratio when mixing my colors. This part took a lot of shoulder internal rotation. My pecs were definitely burning. After this, I took half of the icing and placed it directly into the piping bags. With the other half still in the bowls, I very slowly added more water to create my flood icing. Experts recommended that I actually use a spray bottle for this portion, which I think would have helped. I was done once the icing reached a shampoo-like consistency and then filled the icing bags with the icing. Finally, the fun part. I put the piping tips into the frosting bags and then inserted my piping frosting. Then I was ready to start outlining. This part took a lot of fine motor coordination. Anytime my hands would start shaking, my cookies would be messed up. After I had an outline of the design, I used the same color of fill icing to fill in the space in between. This part was fairly easy. After the space was filled, I used a toothpick to smooth it all out and pop any air bubbles. After these were dry, I went back over with more piping frosting to create more intricate details. And that's it. This was my final result, a fruit and wine basket made out of sugar cookies. This is far from perfect, but I was happy with how the cookies turned out, and they tasted even better. For reference, here's my original Pinterest inspiration. Maybe I'll get closer next time. Here are some final thoughts on my craft. I originally picked baking cookies because I like the idea of breaking down steps to fit the needs of individual patients. However, all of the steps together are very time consuming, as well as the materials were expensive and some were hard to find, like the meringue powder. As well, there was a lot of cleanup at the end. Thanks for watching.